The wind howled through the valley like a ghost looking for peace. Above the village, a giant stone pillar stood between broken mountains. It was old, blackened by fire and time. And at its base, a girl was chained, barefoot and bruised. Her name was forgotten. The villagers now called her the Chosen. They said she was cursed from birth, born under a red moon with strange eyes. She was meant to die, to please the gods. She didn't scream, not anymore. Her voice had gone quiet 3 days ago. But her heart still beat, strong and full of anger. Every night, the crowd came with torches and drums. They threw stones, shouted prayers, and asked the gods to forgive them. They said her blood would save their crops, stop the sickness, and bring rain. But deep inside, they feared her, because she never cried. Tonight was different. The sky was darker than usual. No stars, no moon. Only the red light from the torches dancing on her skin. The high priest raised his hands. The gods are watching, he said. Tonight they take her soul. The crowd cheered, and then left, one by one. No one stayed after midnight. No one dared. Silence returned. Only the wind spoke, whispering secrets. The girl, her hands bleeding from the iron cuffs, looked up at the stars that weren't there. She waited for death, but something inside her whispered, not yet. Then, a sound, a crunch of gravel. Someone was walking. Slowly, carefully, her breath caught. Was it an animal? A spirit? Another priest? But then she saw him. A man stepped into the firelight. Not dressed like the villagers. He wore black leather, dust on his boots, a blade on his back. His eyes didn't shine with fear. They burned with anger. He stopped just a few feet from her. She didn't speak, but her eyes questioned him. He looked at the chains, then at her face. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice low. "You're not their sacrifice." She blinked, confused. He stepped closer, pulled a tool from his belt. She flinched, expecting pain. But he just touched the chains and whispered, "Let's break fate." The metal screamed as it cracked. The chains fell like dead snakes. Her knees gave out, but he caught her. She had never been touched with care before. He lifted her, gently. "We need to move," he said. "They'll come back at sunrise." "But why?" she finally asked, her voice dry and broken. "Why would you save me?" He looked at her, a strange sadness in his eyes. "Because once, someone saved me," he said. "And because your story isn't over." They moved into the woods behind them. The pillar began to hum, low and deep, like a warning. The man stopped and turned. "That's not normal," he whispered. The girl looked back. The pillar was glowing, soft red light pulsing from its cracks. She felt it in her bones. It was waking up. "Run," the man said. They ran through the trees, past roots and shadows. But the wind changed. It carried a voice, not human, not God, a whisper in a forgotten tongue. "Call in her name, her real name." She stopped. "Who's calling me?" she asked, her eyes wide. The man grabbed her hand. "Something old," he said. "Something that doesn't want you free." They disappeared into the forest. But the pillar remained, glowing brighter. The chains left behind began to move on. Their own, twisting, curling, waiting. The fire was far behind them now. The pillar's glow still haunted the sky like a bleeding wound. But the forest offered no comfort, only shadows and the sharp bite of cold air. Branches scratched their arms, roots grabbed at their feet, and the silence was heavy, not peaceful waiting. He carried her until her legs were strong enough to stand, and even then, he stayed close, watching the dark like it owed him something. She followed him without asking questions, not because she trusted him, but because the world behind her was worse than the one ahead. After hours of walking, they reached a broken stone path. Half buried under moss and leaves, he stopped, looked around, and finally spoke. "We'll rest here just for a while." She sat on the cold ground, her back against a tree, her body shaking with exhaustion. Still, her eyes stayed on him. "You never told me your name," she whispered. He stared at the fire he had just lit, letting the flames dance in his reflection. I don't use it anymore, he said. Names mean little when the world decides who you are. She didn't press him. Silence settled again, but this time it was different, almost warm. He tossed her a small cloth bundle. Inside was dry bread and something that looked like dried meat. She ate like someone who hadn't known food in days. Because she hadn't, when her hands finally stopped shaking. She asked the question that burned inside her chest. Why me? He didn't look at her. They fear what they don't understand, he said, and what they can't control. They sacrifice. She stared at the flames. But I'm no one, she whispered. I don't have powers. I don't even remember. My childhood. He finally turned, looked her in the eyes. That's what they made you believe, he said. But I saw the markings on the pillar. I've read those runes before. Her heart skipped. You can read them? Some, he nodded. They called you the Soul Keeper. She froze, the word crawling over her skin like ice. It felt familiar, like a name said in dreams she could never remember after waking. She wanted to ask more, but the wind changed. Suddenly the fire bent sideways as if bowing to something. He stood up quickly, drawing the blade from his back. Stay behind me, he said. From between the trees came footsteps, not animals. Not men, too quiet, too smooth. Then came the chanting, voices without bodies, circling them like smoke. The girl grabbed his arm. They followed us, she said. No, he whispered. They have arrived. Figures began to appear cloaked. In shadows, eyes glowing like dying stars. They didn't walk, they floated above the ground. The girl felt her breath tighten in her chest. Her legs refused to move. Her fingers went cold. One of the shadows moved forward. It didn't speak. But its voice entered her mind. Return, it said. Return to the pillar, complete the offering. She fell to her knees, clutching her head, but the man stood tall, blade raised, voice steady. She is not yours, he growled. She was never yours, the shadow hissed. And the ground cracked beneath their feet, trees bent backward. Roots snapping like bones. The man stepped forward, placing himself between her and the shadows. I defy you, he said, loud enough to shake the air. The shadows screamed, not with mouths, but with wind and pain and memory. Then, like fog burned by sunlight, they vanished. The forest fell still. She looked up at him, eyes wide. You spoke against them, she whispered. The gods. He turned back, breathing hard. They are not gods, he said. They are jailers. She stared into the fire again, her mind full of old words, ancient names, and one question echoing louder than all. Who am I really? He sat beside her, quietly placing a hand on his blade. We have to move before dawn, he said. She nodded, even though she wanted to rest, because the world had changed, and so had she. The forest didn't rest, not even after the shadows were gone. Something else had awakened, something older than the trees and darker than the sky. She felt it in her bones, like a storm waiting just behind the next breath. The man didn't speak much now. His eyes scanned every branch, every shadow. They both knew the peace wouldn't last. She walked beside him, not behind. Her feet were sore, her thoughts heavier than her steps. But she didn't ask for rest. She wanted answers. But fear swallowed her voice every time she tried. What if the answers were worse than the silence? The trees grew thinner, the air sharper. Far ahead, something stood tall in the fog. Not a building, not a creature. It looked like a giant stone arch, half buried in the dirt, covered in roots and time. He walked to it slowly, brushing away the moss. Symbols carved in the stone glowed faintly under his touch. She felt her knees weaken. Those symbols, she had seen them in dreams, on walls that bled, on skies that burned. Before she could speak, he turned to her and said, They're tracking us now. Who? She asked, though part of her already knew. The keepers, he answered. Not humans, not gods, just things that follow rules no one remembers anymore. A sound broke the silence. A distant howl, low and hollow, then another, closer. Not wolves, worse. He didn't wait. Run, he said, and they ran. The forest blurred, but the howl stayed with them. Every second, closer, every second, louder. Branches sliced her arms, mud pulled at her feet, but she kept moving. Then the ground gave way. They slid down a slope through rocks and roots, into a wide, open pit. She coughed, rolled, and looked. Up, the man had landed beside her, already getting up. They were surrounded, not by hunters, by statues, 10 of them, tall and cracked, their faces hidden under broken helmets. Each held a chained orb at its feet, glowing faintly blue. She reached toward one, but he stopped her. "Don't," he warned. "They remember things." "Statues?" She asked, confused. "They're not statues," he said. "They're warnings." The howling stopped. That was worse than the sound itself. It meant whatever followed them was near. Watching, choosing the perfect moment, he scanned the area and pointed to a tunnel carved into the rock behind the farthest statue. "This way," he said. "We go in deep." She hesitated. The tunnel looked alive, pulsing with faint red veins in the stone, like it was breathing. "I can feel something inside," she whispered. "Good," he said. "So can I." They entered, and the world outside fell away. The tunnel swallowed sound, swallowed light. She stayed close to him. But something was changing. In the corner of her mind, a name whispered, over and over. Not her given name, something older. Then she heard a voice, not his, not hers, but from the stone, from the walls themselves. "You are marked," it said. "She carries the key," another voice answered. "Return her to the gate," a third voice hissed. "Let her awaken." Her knees buckled, and her hands pressed to her ears. He held her upright, his grip firm. "They're speaking to you," he said. "You understand them." "I don't," she said, her eyes wide. "But I think I used to." Ahead, the tunnel opened into a round chamber. On the walls were paintings, murals of people bowing to light and falling into darkness. At the center stood a platform with 7 broken chains, and one still glowing. She stepped toward it, drawn by a pull she couldn't fight. Her fingers touched the last chain, and images exploded in her mind. A war in the stars, a world burning, a girl standing between gods and men, and a voice her own shouting, "Chain me if you must, but I will return." She fell to the ground, shaking, gasping. He was already beside her. "What did you see?" he asked. "I think," she whispered. "I think I died before." From the shadows, the howling began again, closer than ever. But now she didn't just hear it. She felt it, calling to her, not to kill, but to take her back, and this time she wasn't sure if she wanted to run. The silence after the howl was louder than any scream. The chamber seemed to pulse, like it had a heartbeat. The glowing chain at the center flickered, and shadows shifted across the mural, but neither of them moved, not right away, because the girl was breathing differently now. Her eyes stared at nothing, her hands trembled. Not from fear but memory. Something had opened inside her, and it wasn't ready to close again. He watched carefully, blade still in hand, not because he feared her, but because he feared what the truth might cost. "I saw a war," she said. At last, voice barely above a whisper. "In the sky, there was fire, and a voice like thunder calling my name." "What name?" he asked gently. She shook her head, tears forming without her noticing. "I don't know, but I knew it was mine. I think I wasn't just sacrificed," she said slowly. "I was chosen." "Because I chose." He said nothing, but something shifted in his face. A recognition, a weight, like a soldier seeing an old flag after years of war. The murals on the wall began to change. Not crumble or fade, change. Colors brightened, shapes moved, as if the stone remembered her too. One figure appeared again and again. A girl with light in her hands, standing between armies. Sometimes leading, sometimes falling. Always chained in the end. Her heart pounded harder. She stepped closer. In one part of the mural, she saw a figure kneeling beside the girl. It looked like him, but younger, different armor, same eyes. She turned to him, confused. "This isn't your first time saving me, is it?" He didn't answer, not with words. Instead, he walked to a part of the wall and wiped off the dust. Underneath was a small symbol, 2 circles joined by a line. He traced it with his finger, and the floor beneath them opened. A staircase spiraled downward, breathing out a cold wind that smelled like burnt metal and ash. He looked back at her. "You don't have to come." She took a deep breath, then stepped past him. "I think I do." The staircase was narrow, the walls covered in carvings. She ran her fingers along them, not just symbols, now memories. They pulsed under her skin. Warm and sad, at the bottom was a room, wide and round. In its center, a pedestal held a single silver blade, floating above a pool of dark red liquid. Not blood, something thicker. Older, she approached, and the blade hummed. The liquid below began to glow. A voice echoed, deep and ancient. "Blood remembers," it said. "Even when minds forget." The blade drifted closer to her, turning slowly in the air. He stepped between them. "Are you sure?" he asked. She nodded. "I need to know who I was." She reached out, and the blade turned, gently cutting her palm. Her blood dripped into the pool. The room trembled. The murals on the walls lit up with fire, and her mind was pulled into the past like a falling star. She saw herself in armor, not chains, leading battles against creatures made of shadow and bone. She saw temples fall, kings kneel, and gods bleed. She saw him, the same man, standing beside her, fighting, falling, rising again, always together, always ending the same way. Her chained, and him walking into the fire to bring her back. She gasped, pulling her hand away from the blade. Room went still. The pool of blood darkened. Her knees hit the stone floor. He helped her up, his hand warm, steady. She looked at him, eyes wide. "We've done this before," she whispered, "over and over." He nodded slowly. "And every time I failed to save you." "But why?" she asked. "Why does it always end the same?" He looked toward the glowing stairs behind them. "Because something still holds you," he said. "Something older than time." A rumble shook the ground above them. Dust fell from the ceiling. The howls had returned. But now they were louder. And this time they weren't hunting her. They were welcoming her. The sky had cracked open by the time they left the tunnel. Above the forest, clouds spun in unnatural spirals, glowing faint red from within, like the heavens were remembering something too. The trees stood quiet, frozen, as if they feared what was waking up. She didn't speak. Her steps were slower now, not because of pain, but because the weight of memory had settled inside her. Not just dreams anymore. She remembered faces, battles, screams, and her own voice, shouting commands in a language she still didn't fully understand. He watched her carefully. Every movement she made now carried something else. Power, old power, buried deep and aching to rise. But power that came with a price. They didn't follow the old path. Instead, they walked where the birds didn't fly and the wind refused to blow. He stopped before a stretch of broken stones, half swallowed by the ground. "We're here," he said quietly. She looked ahead and saw it. A structure older than the village, older than the pillar. Half-buried ruins, shaped like an open hand reaching from the earth. Each finger a crumbled spire, reaching for a sky that had long forgotten it. She stepped through the broken entrance, her breath catching. The walls inside still stood barely, but on them were paintings, thousands of them. Stories carved in stone, frozen in time. Her eyes scanned the scenes. One showed a woman with eyes of fire and wings made of stars. Another showed her kneeling, arms stretched out, chains around her wrists. The same chains that once held her to the pillar. "I was something else before," she whispered. "Not just a girl." He nodded. "You were a protector," he said, "of something sacred." "What did I protect?" she asked. He walked to a large mosaic at the end of the hall, wiped away the dust. The image showed a gate, floating in space. Behind it, a black sun. In front of it, her, standing alone. "Not what?" he said. "Where?" She stepped closer, and the stone beneath her feet responded. A soft light pulsed beneath the tiles. The temple wasn't dead. It had been waiting. Then came the sound, metal scraping against stone. Slow and heavy, she turned, and something crawled from the far. Shadow, not a beast, not a man. Its body was made of armor, broken and rusted, but inside the helmet there was no face, only light, red and pulsing. She stepped back, her heart racing, but the figure didn't move fast. It simply pointed at her chest, then at the mosaic, and finally placed a hand on the floor. A second later, the ground cracked. Open. A stairway leading downward, again, always downward. He looked at her. This is where the gods feared to enter. He said, this is where they tried to seal you. They walked together into the dark. Torches lit by unseen hands flickered to life along the walls. As they descended, the air grew warmer, not fire warm, memory warm. She could feel parts of herself returning, pieces of a puzzle too vast to see all at once. At the bottom, they entered a room shaped like a star. 7 pillars stood in a circle, each with a different mark, and in the center, a stone altar, and on it, a mirror, cracked in 3 places. She stepped toward it, her reflection flickering. In one blink she saw herself young, confused, mortal. In the next, she saw herself older, armored, wings behind her shoulders. And in the third, she was burning, not screaming, only watching. Eyes white as suns, a whisper came from the mirror, soft and sorrowful. Do you remember now, flame-born? She fell to her knees, hands on the altar. The voice continued, you were never meant to be worshipped, only feared. You were not their savior, you were their end. The man stepped forward, grabbed her shoulders. Don't listen to it, he said. That's what they want you to believe. But the words had already entered her, and something deep inside her agreed. She looked up at him, tears and fire in her eyes. If I was their weapon, she whispered, then who are you? He opened his hand, revealing a small stone, glowing blue, shaped like an eye. I'm your anchor, he said, and without me, you fall. The walls around them began to shake, dust fell like ash, and from the top of the stairs the rusted armor figure began to speak, in the voice of a god, she remembers. It said, she awakens, and then the temple began to breathe. Asterisk. The temple groaned like it was alive and waking from a long, bitter sleep. Dust poured from the ceiling like falling stars. The air was thicker, now like standing inside someone else's memory. She rose slowly from the altar, her hands glowing. Faintly, not fire, not light, but something in between. The rusted figure at the top of the stairs had not moved. But its voice echoed from every wall. You have remembered enough. It said, you are ready to return. She shook her head. I'm not going back. Her voice didn't shake anymore. It rang through the stone like truth that refused to break. The man stood beside her, still holding the blue stone. It pulsed with each beat of her heart, like it belonged there. She turned to him. You knew this would happen. He nodded once, slowly. I hoped it wouldn't, he said, but I prepared if it did. She looked at the 7 pillars that surrounded them, each one with a different mark, one glowing now, the others quiet. What are these? She asked. He pointed at them in silence, then spoke with care. These are the chains that once held the world together, each one locked by a choice. And you broke 6. Her breath caught. Then why is one still glowing? Because that's the final chain, he said, the one you couldn't destroy. She stepped closer, her hand hovered over the stone. The mark on it pulsed like it knew her, and then she heard it. Deep inside her mind, a voice she hadn't heard since before she was born. The chain was not forged to trap you, it whispered. It was made to protect them from what you would become. A memory rose in her chest like heat. She saw a battlefield, covered in ash, and herself standing over it, hands burning, eyes blind with rage. She had screamed, not from pain, but from power, and the sky had torn open. The chain had been placed not to punish her, but to stop her, and she had asked for it. She staggered back, tears on her face. I did this to myself, she whispered. I sealed my own power away. He stepped toward her. You had to. He said, you were becoming something the world couldn't survive. Then why break the chains now? She asked, why bring me back? His answer was soft. Because the world is dying anyway. The temple began to shake harder. A crack split the floor beneath them, revealing a glowing pit of red light. Above, the sky outside roared and thunder. Without lightning shook the mountains, the figure at the stairs finally moved. But it didn't walk, it floated, its armor peeling, revealing something underneath. Not flesh, not bone, a storm made of will and fire. You will break the final chain, it said, or we will burn this world down before you awaken fully. She clenched her fists, the glow in her palms brightening. No, she said. This time I choose. She turned to the man. Give me the anchor, he hesitated. If I do, I might lose you, he said. She smiled softly. No, she whispered. You'll help me remember who I want to be. He placed the stone into her hands. As soon as it touched her skin, the final pillar lit up like sunrise, and the chain cracked. A scream filled the room, not hers. Not his, but the chain itself, like it didn't want to die. The storm being roared. The ground split open, and from deep below, something enormous began to rise. Wings made of flame, a heart of broken stars. It was her shadow, her true self, the part she had locked away long ago, and now it was free. The world did not end with fire, it ended with silence, a deep, endless silence before the storm broke through. The girl stood at the heart of the broken temple, the last chain now dust beneath her feet. The stone floor glowed with power older than language, and above her, the sky twisted into a spiral of red and black. As if the heavens couldn't decide whether to watch or run. She was no longer just a girl, and yet she had never felt more human. The fire inside her was no longer locked away. It moved through her veins like memory, like music, like war. Before her stood the being of lightless fire, her shadow, her other self, the part she had buried, sealed, chained, not out of weakness, but out of love for a world that could never understand her. Now that same world had summoned her back, begging her to fight its final battle. The man, the one who had followed her through lifetimes, stood at her side, wounded, tired, but never afraid. He looked at her like she was both miracle and weapon, and maybe she was. You don't have to do this, he said. His voice was quiet, but steady. You can walk away now. Let them face what they've summoned. She smiled, a strange sadness in her eyes. That would be easier, she said. But I remember now. They didn't chain me because they hated me. They chained me because they believed I could become more than destruction. She stepped forward, and the sky cracked. Lightning without thunder danced between the clouds. The storm being roared her shadow. Her reflection of rage and chaos, it offered her power, the old kind. The kind that bends stars and burns time itself. She looked into its eyes, and saw her past, her pain, her broken lifetimes, but also the people who had dared to fight beside her. Even when they knew they couldn't win, she lifted her hand. And for a heartbeat, the world waited. She didn't attack. She didn't run. She opened her hand, and the fire inside her dimmed to a glow, not because it was weak, but because it was controlled, for the first time chosen. I am not your weapon, she whispered. I am not your slave. I am not your god. I am simply free. The storm being howled and lunged toward her, but it was too late. The light she released wasn't violent. It was truth. And in truth, the shadow could not exist. It shattered, not with screams, but with peace. The sky opened, the red faded, and the chains across the world began to vanish. The villagers would wake tomorrow without fear. The pillars would crumble into dust, and the gods, silent for centuries, would feel the loss of what they tried to control. She fell to her knees. Breath ragged, the man rushed to her, held her like she might disappear again. But she didn't, she stayed. I thought I'd lose you, he whispered. You did, she said, smiling weakly. Many times. But you kept finding me. He helped her to her feet. The sun began to rise, pale gold spilling across the ruins. For the first time in lifetimes, there were no chains, no watchers, no gods demanding blood, only two. People walking out of a temple that once held the end of the world, and into a future that hadn't been written yet.